where most of the population is Buddhist. About 5% are Muslim, and the Christian church has a small presence there as well. But if you're Buddhist and you lived in Cambodia, you would no doubt offer meats to your idols. This is the stairs to the temple, the Buddhist temple in Cambodia. And here people are bringing their gifts. All kinds of foods, not only meats, but other foods as well. Larger animals are tied and beheaded. And here you see a goat that is for the sacrifice in the temple. Cute little fella. May not have any clue as to what's going to happen in a few minutes. There's the sacrifice of the goat. The temple actually has a trench built in to carry the blood away. And the blood is collected. There are more goats in waiting. It's a big deal to offer meats to idols. And these folks are taking food to the altar. And then there's a presentation of gifts to the gods. They take the foods to the gods, to the altars that have been erected in the temple. And then there's the offering of the fires. So again, this is not something that happened thousands of years ago. This is something that happens today in Cambodia and other places with similar beliefs. What is Paul talking about when he's talking about foods, meats especially, offered to idols? Well, you see, when you had a sacrifice, a small portion of it is actually taken to the temple gods and offered in a burnt offering. Very small portion. A slightly larger portion goes to the priest of the temple. That's part of their payment. The priests get free food, in other words. At most of the animal that is sacrificed goes to the worshiper. And the worshiper can either sell the food on the streets, or the worshiper can take the food home to his family and eat it, or the worshiper can be in the temple and just eat a portion of the food right there and take the rest home, or take the rest and sell it. So that's what's happening, you see, in pagan temples. Now the question was, okay, you pagans, you guys who are getting drunk at the Lord's Supper, you guys who are not mature Christians, you are offering meats to idols, and is that right or is that wrong? And as these meats that were offered to the idols, are those leftover meats, those leftover portions, is it okay for Christians to eat those? Or are they defiled because they were offered to pagan gods in pagan temples? So that was the question. And this is what the Apostle Paul says about that situation in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 8. He says, now regarding your question about food that's been offered to idols, yes, we know that we all have knowledge about this issue. But while knowledge makes us feel important, it is love that strengthens the church. Anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much. And I just love how smart Apostle Paul is. You know, if you ever run across someone who has the answer to everything, you know that they're really not very smart. And we can base that on experience and because the Apostle Paul tells us so. So what about eating meats, he goes on to say, that have been offered to the idols? Well, we all know that an idol is not really a god and that there's only one God. And there's only one Lord Jesus Christ through whom God made everything and that we've been given life. So he's saying, if someone wants to offer, or someone wants to eat food that's been offered to idols, it shouldn't be a big deal because we know those idols are really nothing. That's his argument here. They're nothing. We know there's only one God, and it has nothing to do with those idols. Those idols are just wood or stone. So if you have good food, then why not eat it? So that's part of what he's thinking. He says, however, not all believers know this because these are young believers. They're not aware of it. So some are accustomed to thinking of idols as being real. So when they eat food that's been offered to idols, they think of it as the worship of real gods, and their weak consciences are violated. He says, so when some people eat those foods that were offered to the gods, to them it's like you're worshiping those gods because they don't understand. They don't have knowledge that those gods are nothing. They're just idols of wood and stone. And so he says, you must be careful so that your freedom does not cause others with a weaker conscience to stumble. For if others see you with your superior knowledge eating in the temple of an idol, won't they become encouraged to violate their conscience by eating food that's been offered to an idol? So he's saying, these people are not mature. So what you want to be careful of is don't make them stumble. Do everything you can not to make them stumble. He says even you have freedoms that you may not want to exercise because it may make somebody else stumble. He says, so because of your superior knowledge, a weak believer for whom Christ died will be destroyed. When you sin against other believers by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, you sin against Christ. So the Apostle Paul says, some of you more mature believers are saying, go ahead, eat the meat. Because it's okay. It's just a dumb idol. That's good meat, good nutrition. Eat it. They weren't aware of Vigilinks back in those days. So he says, go ahead, eat the meat. But he says, some people see you doing that, and they will stumble because they think here you are a Christian and you're worshiping an idol. And that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. So he says, so if what I eat causes another believer to sin, I will never eat meat again as long as I live, for I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. I think that's such great advice. I'm reminded a while back, we had a fellow in this church by the name of Val Lear. And Val was elderly when I met him 8 years ago, and recently, he died. He was in his 80s, I believe. And in talking to Val, I visited him in his home. And I said, Val, you're pretty traditional Seventh-day Adventist Christian, and I'm just wondering, why do you come to Orange Coast Church, after all, they have drums, they have guitars. What are you doing at Orange Coast Church? And I remember him smiling, and he said, to be truthful, I don't really like the music that much, but my granddaughter does. And if it will bring my granddaughter to church, then I'm all for it. I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This man's got it right. He's giving up his personal freedom to enjoy traditional conservative music